Welcome to the working world. I'm Karen Mendez.
And I'm Jamie Lingham. I tell you what, Karen, Eddie Coronel, what a really fascinating guy. So much enthusiasm, uh, really great ideas in the mobility space and the talent mobility space. What do you think?
Yeah, loved it. For me, there was some real insights, particularly around that talent piece. Him coming from the background of having that talent acquisitions foundations allows him to look at mobility in a whole different way and be able to take that and translate that across to the bottom line impacts to an organization. So for me, the experience across Siemens and EA and Uber, loved it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this is the whole intention of the working world is to help practitioners like yourself, the Karens of the world,
Exactly.
really expand and understand what's going out, what's going on out in the industry and what the trailblazers are doing. Because I think Eddie's definitely up there. He's making his path and he's I think, just enjoy.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks, Karen. Eddie, great to finally have you on the show. I know we've been trying to marry up on our diaries, but you're here, which is really great and great for our audience. Now, I just want you to give everyone out there just a bit of a background on yourself. You've got a pretty impressive CV and life experiences.
Well, thanks for having me on the show, and I appreciate the comment. Yeah, I have a unique set of experiences that I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have traveled a lot and to be working for a lot of different mobility organizations, some very big, some very small and very unique. So but yeah, I mean, like, you just want me to give you a breakdown of my background a little bit to get us started?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, of course. So I actually started my career in talent acquisition. I started off as a recruiter. That was my first role. I
Yeah.
had just gotten off an internship in Thailand and my wife was pregnant and I'm like, I need a job. And having a liberal arts degree didn't help with the job search. So I kind of just jumped into whatever was first. And I got a job in talent acquisition. And from there, I had a great opportunity to kind of learn a little bit about the business, learn about recruiting. But I've always wanted to work abroad. And that was like the biggest thing. So when I had an opportunity that came up at Siemens, where I was able to work as a global mobility consultant, I had no idea what it was. As I've learned from almost 99% of mobility professionals, they just fall into it. There's never someone that went to school and said, I want to be a mobility professional.
100%.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
A degree in
And
like
so
mobility professionals, right?
exactly.
Masters in, yeah.
So I found an opportunity and I jumped at it, and I spent 4 years at Siemens, and I had a lot of career progression there. It was a really awesome opportunity. I went from doing business assessments to I went to do delegations, and then I went to travel consultant, and then I was an America subject matter expert, and then my last year and a half, I became a regional account manager for APAC. And so it was a really great experience working at Siemens, one of the largest in-house mobility programs globally. When I was there, I think they had almost like 300 plus individuals working on the mobility team only. And I
Wow.
think we had somewhere upwards over 200,000 annual assignments. That was this pre-pandemic numbers though, so I don't know how it's been
Yeah.
since then. But so a lot of heavy volume, and so I had a really great opportunity to jump into like high volume, traditional mobility cases, expats, delegations, rotation programs, business travels, the whole gambit. And so um, loved my experience there. And in fact, when I got promoted, I was going to move to Singapore and kind of be on your side of the world. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, got promoted December of 2019, right before the
Right,
pandemic hit.
COVID, exactly. Yeah.
And I wasn't able to relocate. So for a year and a half, I managed the team in APAC for a year and a half here from Orlando, Florida, where I'm based. And I have to say, I know you guys work in APAC numbers and you accommodate sometimes US, clients, and doing the opposite for a year and a half, I feel your pain because working to 2 in the morning
Yeah.
to take
Yeah.
these calls and meet with stakeholders, it wasn't my ideal situation. But I learned a lot and I had a great opportunity. But after a year and a half, um, I started learning a little bit more about a term that came up that was new, which is called talent mobility. And I was really curious because, as you guys know, during that time, like the future of work was like the big keyword, right? And
Mhm.
hybrid and remote working and so
Mm.
forth. And so I started learning that a lot of these tech companies and some of these innovative organizations were changing the way they do global mobility, and they were incorporating talent management practices in traditional like global mobility teams. And so I was really excited to learn about that. And so I had a chance to take a role at Electronic Arts, which is a video game company for those of you who don't know. And the role was specific to incorporating new internal mobility practices in their global mobility team. And so essentially there was like, hey, we want to incorporate talent management practices, which in the mobility space, it's like we want to have physical relocation or mobility of our employees. We want to get them to point A to point B. But on the talent side, it's like, how can we get more internal career mobility with our employees? How can we have them have different experiences within the organization, not necessarily physically move them one place to another, but give them new roles or have them have new experiences and build skills and development. So for 7 months there, my job was to convince stakeholders and leaders to incorporate these new methodologies in their organization. And it was great. I got to launch some pilot programs. I got to kind of see how talent mobility was working in space. But ultimately, I ended up getting another role at Uber. I kind of got poached, and I was like, the reason why I left was because I had an opportunity to actually manage some of these programs instead of convincing stakeholders to incorporate them. Uber has a really great culture, and they're like, hey, we want to actually have these running, and we have programs going live, and we want you to manage them. So I had the chance to go and program manage our internal talent mobility marketplace.
Is that on a global scale?
Yeah, so it's really
Wow.
cool. So within Uber, I think when people think Uber, they think drivers.
Yeah.
But we have over, I think right now it's like 14,000 corporate employees. So these are engineers, white collar workers, customer service reps, people who work, behind the scenes to help get things moving. And essentially, during the time I was hired 3 years ago, the idea was like, during the Great Resignation, people are moving. There was a lot of opportunities everywhere. So the name of the game was retention. So it was retain, engage, and upskill. How can we do that with this? And that's what these programs did. And so I was able to lead a couple of programs that did just that. And on the flip side, I was able to be operations PM for our mobility programming. So in our traditional relocation, immigration, just basically our operations from the mobility side. So it was a really cool role, kind of a hybrid role. And that's kind of a little bit about my initial experience. But I'll pause there. I don't know if you have any questions so far, though.
I do actually. I want to jump back to your
Yeah.
experience at EA, right? That's a tough gig, like being positioned to sell that concept to leaders in the organization. Can you tell me a little bit, I guess, one, I'm curious about what was driving EA to make that move towards that more strategic talent mobility and introducing those talent management frameworks to mobility, but also what was your sales pitch? What was your positioning around selling that to leaders? Because I guess historically mobility is always seen as a bit of an administrative function, right? So what was your value prop when you went in front of these leaders at EA?
Yeah, I mean, these organizations that I've worked at, they have heavy competition, especially at EA. It's a video game organization. They have tons of different studios that are under tight deadlines, and it's a very lucrative industry. So talent is like the need for talent is very high, and so the reason why the shift happened there and they were trying to incorporate these practices because we wanted to make sure that we retain top talent at the organization. When an engineer, especially like a top engineer, leaves, it gets set back the deadlines, by weeks or even, months. And that's a no-no for an organization that pops out games every year on the dot, So the value proposition that we were trying to sell and that I think that is really valuable to any organization is that if you want to have strong talent that not only are attracted to come to an organization such as, like EA or Uber, but how do we retain them when other lucrative offers are out there? And how do we get more productivity out of them? And how do we keep them happier longer? Because at the end of the day, you can have great people at your organization, but if they're not happy, they're not engaged, and there's opportunity elsewhere, then you're going to see a loss of top talent. So our value prop was just that. By incorporating internal mobility practices, we can see internal, the rate that we use is called internal mobility rate, which is the rate which employees experience movement within an organization. And when an employee experiences internal movement, which is a promotion or a lateral move, or even like a rotation program, or even something where they're trying being on a team for a specific short amount of time to gain a skill, if they experience these type of experiences, then they can increase their what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry, I'm thinking in Spanish now.
You can say it in
They can-
Spanish. I'm sure some people understand you.
It just came to me as bad. No, but they can essentially their time in the organization will be extended. So it'll actually increase an employee's experience, or not experience, employees time in an organization by almost 2.5 years. They can extend it.
Whoa.
I mean, there's a lot of benchmarking that's been done, a lot of research that's been done in terms of mobility, but essentially when you show an employee an opportunity and an experience, and you show that you value the kind of growth that they want, they're more likely to stay within an organization. And there's tangible results shown with that. And so that's kind of the value add with there. But the problem that we had at this organization specifically is that the need to remove talent and move them around an organization or around teams was really difficult because they have deadlines. And so, for example, they have a video game that's going out. You can't, as a manager, you don't want to have your employees go into another team for a little bit to experience something. You want to retain your talent, right? So it was really difficult to get the value prop. And that's why I was really fortunate to be at Uber, where the culture is actually top down. It's coming from our CEO, because in the long run, the organization wants to have top talent in the organization no matter what, right? And if you go down to the manager level, they're like, well, I just need my people to stay here to get my stuff done. Regardless of whether after they burn out in the next 6 months they leave, as long as their project is done, they don't really think that far along ahead. So the difference between some of these organizations versus my experience at Uber was that the culture came top down. Our CEO said, this is something very important. We want to make sure that growth is at the forefront of our organization's culture. And that's how it was. And so there's no fighting with the CEO, right? When they say, hey, we need to make this a priority.
Yeah, that's super important. I think, you always need top down changes, or it doesn't happen. Look, I'm interested in how do you actually start this, because this is a huge cultural shift in a business. And I think about my business, and I think about other businesses around, and you sort of sit there and say, okay, I've got a really well-functioning team, but now I want to come in and actually say to them, hey, you could do something different, or you could move here. I've got a team who works really well with our clients, who's working well with their team members, who's doing the whole thing. And it's sort of like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it type thing, right? So how do you come in and actually introduce that in a way that will, not get people just do a mass exodus, or not upset the political internal, political discussion?
Yeah, so I mean, in regards to how do you implement like a mobility program
how do you introduce this sort of thing? Because it sounds like light and day compared to what you had at Siemens. Siemens sounded amazing. You had a wonderful grounding, and then you sort of not light and day. Maybe it's just the next evolution, or the next 2.0 of the program. But how do you actually introduce that into the managers who have a functioning team, as you said? Like, how do you actually culturally get this across the line?
I found the greatest superpower in getting stakeholder buy-in has been aligning your mobility programs initiatives with the business strategy of the organization. A lot of these organizations, their business strategies isn't going to say we want to have the best mobility like the most global mobility team in the world. Like we have a bottom line, and we have a mission and vision, and the mobility team serves as a function to help facilitate whatever the goal is. Yeah. And so a lot of times that goal needs top talent. I mean, like, there's no going around it. You can have a fantastic product, you can have a fantastic mission, but you need top talent. And where you see the value add from the mobility space is that you can incorporate the mobility expertise and the mobility professionals, and incorporate some of these simple practices in your organization to impact the bottom line of your organization and bring a value add. A lot of times mobility functions are seen as compliance organizations. They seem like, as one employee told me one time, is a bloodsucker of the organization.
Oh, brutal.
That's brutal.
One director told me that at one organization I will not name. But because, I mean, it's true. I mean, like, these delegations cost sometimes millions of dollars when you have high executives go out, and all they see is the money being pulled out. But if you can actually go back and say, hey, I can actually help with your retention issue, which translates into X amount of dollars saved, and within recruiting, backfilling,
retraining, all that sort of.
Exactly. And these are tangible numbers that you can pull up. You just got to do some research, but it's there.
Wow.
Yeah, I think most mobility professionals struggle with being able to get their hands on the data, which then feeds into that research, which then enables you to tangibly produce and demonstrate that. On behalf of all those mobility professionals that are watching, me being one of them, how do you take that? Like, what would your advice be around translating that mobility program BAU and demonstrating the real impact of that on an organization's bottom line? Like, how do you translate that across?
It's a lot of stakeholder management. You have to get involved with all the people that have the data. To your point, like on the mobility space, you probably won't have access to internal fill rates and time to hire and all these other talent attraction metrics that TA uses or talent acquisition uses. So it's a lot of partnership, and it's really difficult because I know that some organizations are very like rigid and they're very siloed. And so if you step into like the talent side, they might be like, hey, what are you doing over here? Like, this is you're kind of interfering in our space. So it requires a lot of building relationships, influencing without authority. I mean, these are things that, a lot of the directors in some of these mobility teams already have, but it's really getting really close to these organizations and finding ways to work together and develop some kind of strategy to help, impact the business as a whole. And so I think a lot of times in some of these organizations that I've seen is that everyone's so focused on their initiatives and their own KPIs that when it comes to seeing how they can impact the business on a more grander scale, it kind of goes above their head. And rightly so, because their focus is on their own, scope of work. And so really teaming up with talent acquisition, I think, is a really good one. They have a lot of metrics, most organizations do, and you can find out how to impact it with some of these programs.
So Eddie, how do you, I love how your brain works. How do you turn up to a new organization? Do you sort of look there and say, okay, that's not working, this can be connected there? Or how does that look and feel for you?
It's interesting. One thing I've learned over the course of my years working with different teams and different organizations is that you have to understand what the why is and everything. Like, when you come into a team and they have, all right, these are our objectives and our priorities. And like, I think in the past I would be like, all right, cool, let's drive into it. Let's go at it. Right. But I started asking, why are these the objectives? Why are these the initiatives? Like, why are we working on these projects? Like, what's the end goal? And a lot of times there isn't an answer.
Well, yeah.
They're like, it's just because we think we need to do this, because this is, what we've been talking about doing. But I like to find out, is it aligned? Like, going back to the business, and this is where you get the best buy-in, is if you go to the business and say, hey, our objectives are aligned with the business objectives, and as we complete our initiatives, it's going to impact you X, Y, and Z. Then you'll get so much stakeholder buy-in, and they'll give you more resources, they'll give you more support, because not only are you fulfilling your scope of work, but you're actually adding immense value on the business side.
Yeah.
To quantify that value, and I'm thinking again about the experience you spoke about at EA, when you're sitting in front of those leaders and you're putting forward the value of the talent mobility, as you called it, do you, as a mobility function, set those KPIs or set those metrics around the value that you're demonstrating, or do you let that team within their little scope of works determine that, or do you work with senior leadership at a group level to determine that? Like, who, in your experience, who is best placed to determine that metric and work towards that goal and demonstrate that goal?
Yeah, I guess it really depends on the organization you work for. Some are very liberal when it comes to letting a team kind of do its thing, and they give you more freedom. While others are really micromanagement. I guess maybe that's not a really positive word. Like, some are maybe more inclined to have more foresight or oversight over these kind of initiatives, and they have
Actively
specific
involved.
agendas. Actively involved. That's a very great way of saying it. And so it just depends on who you work for, and just being able to be adaptable, because, like I said, it's very difficult to introduce these kind of concepts if you're in a really traditional mobility team in a really traditional company. Like, for example, like Siemens, I haven't kept in contact with too much of my colleagues there, but I don't think they're incorporating these type of things. It's not on their radar, and because they have a really full agenda of other items they're working on, and so it just depends specifically on the organization you work for, and being able to adapt and kind of work on the political side of it. And it gets a little difficult sometimes at end, but you have to learn to kind of read the room, I guess.
Well said.
So when, I suppose, when you are so tied up with the doing rather than the working on, I mean, for the Karens of the world who obviously want to make a difference and do make a difference on a daily basis, Karen.
Thank
But
you.
if she wants to just take that next step, what would you advise her to be looking at and focusing on today? Is there, you do something for 3 months, you work on the political, or how would you say to Karen, if we're going to do this as a coaching session for
Yeah.
Karen, and we our goal here is to get Karen to really put this into play, your ideas into play at her organization, how would you be, sort of coaching her through this?
Exactly. I guess understanding what the need of the organization is, and I think there's a couple of different phases that an organization may be in. It could either be we want to attract more talent in an organization. Maybe we have a lot of need, and so we want to attract attract top talent in an organization. Maybe you already have top talent, but you have a attrition issue, so you want to retain your teammates or your top talent. Or maybe you guys are brightly staffed and you just want to get more engagement out of your current population. You're not worried about people leaving or people going, but you just want to make sure that they're actively engaged. So depending on what stage your organization is at, you can cater specific programs to hit that demographic. Because like I said, going back to the whole idea of the business is like having talent that's productive and that stays at your organization for long periods of time is the best present you can give. And if you can cater your I guess your pitch to the executive leadership or whoever you're pitching this to understand that you're impacting that specific goal of helping talent, be more productive, then I think that's the best step. So once you identify like what need they are, what stage of talent needs that they're in, then you can kind of build something. And there's a lot of, I mean, like it's not very expensive too. Like there's a lot of simple things you can do to get started. One example would be, I know that during the time where hiring slowed down a lot at one of the organizations I worked with, we didn't have so much recruiters doing so much work. And so one of the things that we did is we actually had recruiters who we called stay interviews. So are you familiar with exit interviews when someone leaves an organization?
Yeah. Why do you stay here, sort of thing?
Exactly. And I think, first off, I think exit interviews are a waste of time because you want to make sure that you kind of get feedback before people leave.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what that is. The stay interview is what we did is we had the recruiters go and we identified either organizations that had a higher attrition rates than others, or we identified top talent. We had different lists that we wanted to target, right? And so once we identified the people that we wanted to target, we just send them an email saying, hey, Mr. Employee, we saw that you've been working here for X amount of time, and we wanted to just have a call to see how you're doing so far, what your career ambitions are, and where maybe possibly we can, point you in the right direction. And these are 15-minute calls. Recruiter gets on the call with their employee. Hey, how you doing? Like, how's things going at the organization? Do you have feedback for us? How's your team going? Cool. Just giving an opportunity for the employee to talk. And then the last 5 minutes of that 15 minutes, based on what you said, you're really excited about product management. I don't see we have any open requisitions now, but if we do, would you like me to flag them to you?
Yeah, great.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
And just having that conversation, there's tangible results. People were more likely to delay, and we were really targeted too, because one of the other numbers too is people who've been in an organization for 2.5 to 3 years are more likely to leave than those who've been here with just one. And so we see, and these are maybe industry specific too. So I mean, you might have different numbers based on your industry, but in the tech side, after 3 years is kind of the sweet spot where people kind of get antsy if they haven't moved, haven't been promoted. They're like, what can I do with my career? And so by just having that conversation, you have more commitment out of an individual, like, oh, they actually do care about my career. They want to know what's going on. And it kind of gives them energized feeling.
Yeah.
And you see that number of attrition actually decrease because of simple calls like that. And so that doesn't cost a lot of money. You have resources available maybe that can spend some time doing that. And then all the way to full-fledged programming where we actually have vendors that have really cool AI infused technology that can, spend millions of dollars on and do really well things. But it's really everything from that and to all the way AI powered technology in between. So I would really just say find out what the need is in your organization and then find a specific program based on the resources you have to implement as a pilot, just to show proof of concept and then kind of run from there.
It's interesting you say that. We just had our conference last week and our new sales director was having a chat to one of my senior people, and he said, oh, I've always wanted to, go and live and work in Asia. And I was like, whoa, I didn't even know that. He's worked with us for 5 years. And I was like, okay. And now I've sort of got in my head, right, because we're looking to expand at the moment. I'm like, okay, he's the perfect guy for it. So just having those, I mean, that was an ad hoc conversation, but I think sort of making that a point to go and do it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Imagine
Eddie,
being intentional and on those programs. Yeah.
Yeah.
exactly. And the message that that sends to the employee, that the fact that you are intentional. And Eddie, I've seen what you're describing in some organizations where they actually couple that with the learning development angle too. So not only do we not have requisitions, but can I flag them, but also I can see here from your experience that you may have some gaps here, and here. Here's the internal learning and development courses that we have, or here's some things I can recommend externally for you to build on your capabilities, so that when those opportunities arise, that person's in a better state as a candidate to be successful for that role. So yeah, I like those stay interviews. Is that what we're calling them? I like those.
Stay interviews, yeah.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
perfect. Yeah. And I partnered with learning and development, talent acquisition, HR. I mean, like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of collaboration happening within these others, other teams. And that's what makes them very successful, because you need subject matter expertise from other teams. And a lot of times there can be a sense of stepping on other teams' toes. And so if you have alignment and you have a strategic, alignment within the other teams along with the business, and it can be a very beautiful relationship that can blossom out of that, and a lot of good value can be pulled out.
Absolutely. And particularly, I think one thing that gets sometimes overlooked in organizations is the employees that are on mobility engagements, already existing arrangements, whether it's assignments or temporary relocations, they tend to be overlooked as talent pool as well. So I think mobility can play a really great role in tapping into that community and overlaying those strategies that you've just talked about from a talent acquisition perspective, but on that particular talent pool. And then look at potential assignments that are coming up and creating pathways for them as well. So there's a ton that you can do around that space.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I'm curious at Uber, just given the scale of the organization and potentially the program, how did mobility play a role in retaining talent at Uber? Like, what was the strategy? What was the top-down message about how mobility was to play a role in that?
What was our messaging and how mobility played a role in retaining talent? That was your
Yes.
question?
Yes.
Yeah, and so we have a metric called internal fill rate. And essentially this is when a requisition's opened, there's only two ways it can be filled, whether external or internal.
Sure.
And generally you want to have a pretty decent high internal fill rate depending on what stage of growth your organization is at. If you're like at a heavy growth and you're having tons of people, you kind of don't want to have a too high internal fill rate, because that means, people are not really coming in. It's more like just kind of shifting around too much. So you want to have a healthy number. But if you're in an established organization and you have steady growth, then you want to have a pretty high internal fill rate. And so that's one of the metrics that's being utilized to determine how good internal mobility programs are doing. And essentially that's if an employee is hired through a requisition internally versus externally. There's also other metrics such as promotions, assignments. So on the mobility side, like how many people are actually having internal transfers, how many of them are actually moving to another organization, or moving teams or moving countries. So internal mobility can include not just getting a career promotion or a career advancement, but it could also mean maybe someone who wants to have experience, like that employee you mentioned who wants to go to APAC, having the same role, same compensation, they just live in another country. That's internal mobility, and people tend to value these type of experiences over monetary compensation. And that's what we see the trend right now, especially with the workforce being, here in the US specifically, almost 70% of our workforce is millennials and Gen Zs now.
Yeah.
And so these are the things that they want. They want to have experiences. And so these are the type of metrics that are being utilized to make sure that an internal mobility or talent mobility team is having a successful programming and helping with engagement and retention of employees.
How do you set up these programs to make it sort of feel like a bit of a privilege or an honor that you're getting the tap on the shoulder, like, hey, Eddie, we really want you to go over and work in Singapore. How do you add that, sort of special wow factor to it, so people really feel like, whoa, I've been, this is a great privilege. Is that the sort of thing you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important. Like, Uber's not the only organization that has these programs. There's a ton of other companies that have them. But what tends to happen is, I think, visibility, and I think this is with any kind of benefit or employee employee benefit or perk, right? Like if the employees don't know about it, they tend not to use it and they tend not to see it as a value, right? And so I think the biggest issue is making sure that people are aware that these programs are happening. And so really pushing out these programs to a lot of employees. I mean, there's so many things you can do. The biggest one is actually for new hires. A lot of new hires when they come on, that's probably the furthest thing from their mind. Like, how can I move around?
Yeah.
But these programs generally, depending on the organization, will allow you to actually experience internal mobility pretty early in your career. And it's geared that way because people who come on early, if they can experience change pretty I wouldn't say rapidly, but pretty early on in their career, within the maybe in the first year, then they feel more valued. I mean, like how nice is to say that within the first year I got a new job, I got promoted, or I had another, I had another team that want me and I went there. So giving visibility to new hires, making sure that these are highlighted, not even before people, not even after people are hired, but before people are hired, people that are looking into applying this organization or your organization, that these are put as talent attraction tools.
Yeah.
That if you come work at this organization, we actually have programs in place to help you have different careers.
Yeah.
And just like me, like when I came in, I was a recruiter. That wasn't my lifelong ambition. And so I just did it because I needed a job.
Yeah.
But how nice would it have been if that organization I went and said, hey, you're not really into recruiting, but we have X, Y, and Z, and we have programs that can help you learn about them. And potentially, if you want to move, we can do a rotation. You can be on one of those teams. And if you want to go there, you can go straight into that. I most likely would have stayed at that organization early on. So
Yeah. I'm taking notes furiously here, Eddie. I'm just want to let you know I'm loving all this stuff. Sorry, Karen, go for it.
No, that's all right, Jamie. It's funny, Jamie, that you asked a question around the notoriety being tapped on the shoulder, whereas I feel like that was very much the case 15 years ago. Now it's shifted, particularly with the newer generations coming into the workforce, where it's almost expected that would happen, not necessarily that there's notoriety that comes with it anymore. So I think generationally it is shifted from the wow factor that mobility brings. I think it's part of the value proposition that the business offers, and to Eddie's example around joining and then moving straight away, that is very much the expectations of the new generations coming in. And I think organizations are shifting, and I think this is where the rise of the talent mobility concept is coming in. They're shifting their strategies to be able to facilitate that, because it's not a cheap exercise, right? But there are ways that you can do it without investing a whole lot of money. You can provide opportunities around employee initiated, right? So you could have a very minimal package. But it's just interesting. I find it interesting you asked that question around notoriety, because it's actually, I'd say that's old school. That's super old school. And now it's just a case of it's BAU really that it would happen, as opposed to, being the selected one, so to speak.
So that leads me beautifully into my next question, which could be the last one. Eddie, we sort of looked at, you've spoken about mobility 1.0. We've spoken about mobility and talent mobility 2.0. What do you think's next? Do you have any sort of like ideas of how this would be evolving?
If you would ask me that like a year or two ago, I would have thought we'd have a lot more progression, especially with the idea that remote work was becoming super prevalent in a lot of these organizations. But we've kind of seen a little bit of a reversal. People are going more to this hybrid model. I think that specifically with the workforce that we have right now coming in, like I mentioned, in the US, about 70% of the workforce is millennial and Gen Z. The expectations have been set on what the need is. And I think this generation is more entrepreneurial than it has ever been in the workforce. And so I would still say that if organizations don't take this seriously, whether it's in a mobility function or they just have it as a talent management function where they incorporate some kind of internal mobility programming, we're going to see that talent in times of great economic prosperity is going to be moving around. Like just like the Great Resignation, that's going to be a consistent thing happening. Right now, we see the economy is kind of slowing down a little bit, so we don't see as much of it. But as you know, it's still cyclical. It's going to come up and down. And when the ups come up, talent's going to be running around all over the place. People are going to be, jumping jobs, and organizations who are not prepared for those ups and downs, they're going to have really inconsistency with their products and their offerings because they're not going to have the talent necessary to keep it going as well. So I think this is something that needs to be addressed. Every organization needs to have it, and it's going to be more important as we go on, because these people, I'm one of these people. I'm a millennial. But these individuals such as myself and other people that are younger than me, we want, more flexibility. No, but we want these experiences, and rightly so. I think it's something that's really exciting, and the expectations have definitely been exceeded from the previous generation. So I think it's something that's going to continue to grow, and it's not going to slow down.
It's exciting. Brave new world.
It is. Maybe we'll pull you back in 12 months and see where that lands, hey?
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Eddie, we've absolutely loved having you on the show. I think your passion and enthusiasm is infectious. As we said in a pre-conversation, to get people who are so niche and so passionate about it in certain areas, it's just an absolute pleasure. I wish you all the best for your speaking gigs and your, everything else in between your roles. Yeah, no, it's been really good.
Yeah, and if any of your viewers are interested in learning more, I'm always loving to connect on LinkedIn, and connect one-on-one, just to kind of talk about this, because it's something that I think is very interesting. A lot of organizations want to do it, but they don't know where to start, and I love having this kind of conversations and consulting. So I'd love to connect with individuals who are interested in learning more.
Perfect. The Karens of the world.
Exactly. I know. Thank
We'll
you,
have a talk,
Eddie.
Karen, me and you one-on-one.
Yeah. Thank you, Eddie, for your time today. Lovely to see you, and thanks for being on the working board.
It was a pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Eddie.
Take care.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Bye.